Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me, Scott. My name is Mike Lazerow, the CEO of Buddy Media. It is great to be here. For a while, it didn't look like I was going to be here. When I was 2 years old, I almost died, and I should have died. I had a hole in between my two ventricles. Ventricles kind of keep the oxygenated and unoxygenated blood separate. And so today, if it happened, they would have just gone in and operated, but back then, they didn't operate. You just went to the temple or church and prayed. Now, the good news is it closed miraculously, which I'm very excited about. And I had a relatively normal childhood. So I went to school like all other kids, and I went to summer camp, and I did okay in school. I wasn't this guy, Albert Einstein, but I did okay. And I played in the band. I wish it was a rock band, but it was closer to this type of band, which isn't as cool. And I wrote for the newspaper. And one summer, I'm like, what is this working thing? So I'm going to go and try to get a job. And I actually get a job miraculously at the political hotline, which was run by a guy named Doug Bailey, who you may or may not know. He orchestrated the Ford Dole campaign in 1976, which happens to be the year I should have died. And so with a little experience and okay grades, I, for whatever reason, applied to Harvard. They don't really want me, unfortunately. And then I applied to Penn, and they didn't want me either. And so, finally I applied to Duke, and they don't want me either. So what is a Jewish boy from DC to do if he has a little job experience? He's written for the newspaper, and he hasn't gotten in anywhere else. He goes to the Medill School of Journalists to be a journalist, which was, in Chicago. I was okay with that. Moved from DC to Chicago, and I want to be this guy who we all know is Edward R. Murrow. I want to be the world's next great journalist. But something funny happened on the way to being Edward R. Murrow. The internet. So it's now 1994, and this internet thing is just taking off.
That's big. How does one know? What do you write to it like mail?
No, a lot of people use it and communicate. I guess they can communicate with NBC writers and producers. Allison, can you explain what internet is?
So this is 1994. This isn't kind of 1794, and so. But on college campuses, the internet thing's taken off. So MIT launches their campus paper, which is the first paper, and I get this idea of why don't I start a business? I don't really know what a business is, but let's connect the world's newspapers through a wire service. So I start the idea of a business. I write a business plan. I do everything that everyone does when they go to start a business plan, and I kind of know in my mind that newspapers are dying, even though it's very early on, but I ignore my gut, and I go right for the Daily Northwestern. I don't do the business. And during the summer, I go back to DC, and I'm a political reporter for Roll Call, which is the newspaper at Capitol Hill. And that summer, when I was 19, something else happened. I almost die again, which is not good. And so what happened is now the hole in my heart is getting bigger, and now I have aortic valve damage, which does not sound good. So I go and talk to this guy, Richard Hopkins. I say, I got some problems, you got to fix me. He says, okay, and he goes in and he fixes the VSD, he fixes the valve just kind of manually, he sews it up, and then 8 days later it bursts. And so I have zero, at this point I have zero blood pressure. I get rushed to the hospital. I literally am within hours of dying. And I talk to this guy again, you got to fix me. That's cool, right? And he goes in, he actually cuts out my valve, which is a true story, and puts in this, the St. Jude's number 25 artificial aortic valve. So he sews me up, and he, for whatever reason, leaves wires in my chest. This is my chest. This isn't kind of iStock photo. There are wires in the chest, and you can see the valve. And I go back to Northwestern, which I kind of asked my mom later, why am I going back to Northwestern and with this kind of fake heart? My brothers call it the baboon heart. And so I no longer want to be a journalist. I now want to ride the internet. I remember thinking, the internet is the future. I am now doing this thing. And so, I'm living with this guy from SNL, Seth Meyers. Don't tell him I put this in here. And 3 other guys in a fraternity house starting this business called UWire. And I incubated for 2 years. I graduate. And then I merged it with a company called Student Advantage, and this goes public in 1999. I didn't even know what an IPO was like 6 months before we did go public. The stock goes to 30, and I'm now 25 years old and a millionaire, okay, which was as crazy as getting like heart surgery to me. And same year of 99, I get married, and all of this would never have happened if I hadn't almost died. Twice, I think, but at least the second time for sure. And the reason is we are paralyzed by fear. Okay, so fear is the innovation inhibitor. It keeps us from doing stuff. It's fear of not doing what I'm supposed to do, fear of kind of getting fired, all these fears we have, fear of failure. All of this is running through me. And if you look at the science of fear, fear causes us to make crazy decisions. So the year after 9/11, people decide not to fly but to drive. 1,600 people who made that decision died driving. Okay, chalked up as a car crash and I decided not to fly, which is much safer. Death, however, accelerates innovation. Okay? So it accelerates action. It kind of seeing your own mortality. That's what eliminates the fear and causes you to act. So when I look at Jen Lin, who media executive, diagnosed with cancer, she's raised $10 million. She's no longer with us, died earlier this year. She talks about what getting rid of that fear did to her.
It's easier to unleash all that you've unconsciously been holding back. You become more inspiring, more powerful, more creative, more open to anything that's thrown at you. And you can really thrive.
So when you look at business, Rick Elias, he's in seat 1D of the U.S. Air Flight. He's been around for 10 years as his business, and he talks about after he got in the crash, it took 10 years to grow his business. The next year, he doubles his staff, and then this year wins the Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year award. He does it because he eliminates fear and infuses his whole organization with this whole idea of living without fear. Now, let's not forget Apple. They're 90 days from going out of business, and then they decide to innovate and bring Steve Jobs back.
Company. I think the way out is not to slash and burn, it's to innovate. That's how Apple got to its glory, and I think that's how Apple could return to it.
So, 1997, right after that, they announced a deal with Microsoft, $150 million investment. That was unimaginable, and they're now one of the most valuable companies in the world. So when there's nothing to fear, we do the imaginable. Why don't we do that when we don't see our death, when we're healthy, when we're happy as an individual and a company? And pivots, which is kind of changing what you're doing, love death. Okay? It's a fear, or this is the guy who invented this kind of, you either fight or you flee, fight or flight response. And a lot of companies, like RIM, they know in 2005 the iPhone's coming out, they try to fight it, okay? They react to it by laughing at it and trying to poo-poo it. Others, like BMW, they're making airplane engines, and that turns into kind of cars, okay? Galoshes, if you're a Nokia, turning into phones, and the rice cooker was the first product from Sony. Okay, these are companies and the issue is that by the time you try to pivot, meaning you've stalled as a business, it's too late, okay? 10% of the companies recover after they've stalled, after they go into what BlackBerry and RIM is doing. Now, startups do this very well, okay? So this is Sticky Bits, which is probably the worst idea ever. We're going to scan stuff in the real world. This is now Turntable FM, the coolest music site in the world. Okay? My own company, AceBucks. This was the worst idea I've ever come up with. The other one I showed is worse, but this is now what we do. We're a software company. Okay? So Mark Zuckerberg is at the top of the world. Okay? People are engaging with Facebook like no other website in the history of the universe. He blows up the site and reimagines what Facebook looks like while he's healthy. And the reason is we all have gut reactions. We all know in our gut what the right decision is. You know what the right decision is, but we talk ourselves out of it. You make the decision in your gut, then the next 2 days are talking your gut out of that decision. Okay? So people don't say, I shouldn't have listened to my gut. People says, oh, God, my gut got me here, it's a bad decision. Okay, so, and the reason is we're eternal optimists. Okay, we're driven by fear as business people, as humans. And so your challenge here is not how do you fix what's broken, even though that's important, you got to fix what's important. But really, it's your mission is to focus on what doesn't seem to be broken, what everyone else doesn't seem to be broken, but in your gut you kind of think is broken. And so when we talk about innovation, why are we here today? It's how do we do the unimaginable before we see our own death? And if you can do that as an individual and as a company, you're going to lead a happier life and grow shareholder value. So thank you.